As Brian's bringing up the presentation that Chris, myself, and him will be going through today, would like to introduce everybody. Thank everybody for your time joining real time. I know there's a lot of folks that registered for this, so we're pretty excited about the conversation. We're here today to talk about intentional AI, what Ashling is calling intentional AI, because at the end of the day, what Peak AI and now as a part of UiPath represents is very, very specific big business pains that we are solving with an agentic AI approach, a more modern approach to maybe how we used to solve things in the enterprise application, the ERP, MRP, CPQ era. So with me, I would like to have my co-host here kick off with some introductions, maybe starting left to right with Chris Ashley.
Thanks, Marshall. And likewise, excited to be here. My name's Chris. I'm the VP of Strategy and Business Development of Peak. And as Marshall mentioned, we are an AI company that was acquired by UiPath a few months ago. And I've been with Peak for 6.5 years. And I've spent the majority of that 6.5 years running workshops and spending time in boardrooms and workshop rooms with commercial leadership teams and technical leadership teams to help them scope out, architect, and ultimately figure out how they can augment their core business processes to drive more profit, more revenue, and more operational efficiencies. So really excited to be here with Aisling to talk about the future of Agentic.
We're excited to be here with you, Chris. Real quick introduction from my side, founder and co-CEO of Ashling Partners. I grew up in the process improvement and enterprise application implementation space. So I did a lot of packaged application, ERP, MRP, CPQ implementations throughout my history. Ashling's really kind of grown and evolved as we have created incremental improvements to what we call intelligent automation. So really started the organization more focused on rule-driven automation. And it's just been fascinating and exciting to watch the evolution go into more non-deterministic technologies. And AI has been embedded in our workflows for some time, and the capabilities of AI and how we leverage it to garnish more business value is pretty excited. And I'm pretty excited about that part of the conversation today. It's not just a cost out conversation where we're talking about customer experience, pricing, and quoting, and the ability to ensure that we're setting the right expectations with our customers on inventory levels. So pretty excited to moderate this with two of the best in the business, and Chris and Brian.
And Brian Armstrong, advisory for manufacturing distribution, 4 years at Ashling. Similar to what Chris said, a lot of workshopping around some of these opportunities. My background was actually in manufacturing ops, 15 years in that space. So excited to see that there's a lot of progress in some of these common pain points that you see on a day in, day out basis still within that industry.
So maybe just setting a little context here as we double click into the conversation today. I think it's important to recognize that yes, there's a lot of agentic washing occurring in the world today, but I do think we know a couple of truths. You do have to have an enterprise agentic approach, and you do have to understand how long-running workflows work in order to orchestrate the additional actors, like an agent, like a robot, like an ML model, like a low-code app. These actors need to be orchestrated. So we aren't just shifting into agentic orchestration. It is occurring. We have plenty of examples, some in this presentation, and every week we see a couple dozen, it feels like. At Ashling, we see this as a natural evolution, as I mentioned in the intro. The most impactful of this evolution is going to be the full stack agentic AI application. So much like our best employees, this is going to be measured not just by efficiency, but by the quality of decisions. This is goal-based decisioning. So we're enriching decision-making processes, not just rule-driven business processes at this point. And just like any great decision maker, their success is going to hinge on two things. It's going to be the quality of the tools that we're equipping our organization and our workforce to use, and the context, so the data foundations that we're grounded in order to make decisions with the vehicle of the technology we have at our disposal. This shift towards agentic is not theoretical. I can't stress this piece enough. It is truly happening now, and I think it's pretty exciting. But I also think people need to think maybe with smaller, shrinked worlds in mind before you go enterprise wide. So with that in mind, I'm going to pause and I'm going to pass it over to Chris to take us through a little bit of level setting on the ecosystem that both PKI and now PKI as a part of UiPath is approaching this agentic era with, and really what it means for the enterprise for the folks that are attending this call.
Yeah, thanks, Marshall. I think this visual on the right-hand side acts as a nice framing mechanism for the acquisition of Peak via UiPath. UiPath, as many people on this call will know, have been the leader in automation and RPA for the past decade, in many ways defined the category, and are now becoming the leader in agentic orchestration for the enterprise as well. And that horizontal capability, the ability to orchestrate people, bots, and agents across end-to-end business processes, can now be augmented with Peak's capability. And Peak, over the last 10 years, have specialized in optimizing commercial decision making using AI, predictive and now agentic AI for pricing and inventory management decisions. And we do that for some of the biggest companies in the world, PepsiCo, Nike, Heidelberg Materials, typically inventory intensive businesses that need to optimize their ultimate unit of value, which is their inventory, which they need to move around their network in the most efficient way. And price in the most efficient way to drive the core profit and cost levers of the business in the most efficient manner. And then, of course, we have Ashling as a key wrapper around all of this, which supports the discovery of automation and AI opportunities, the ability to yield value and business impact from those opportunities, and the associated transformation required to go on this next stage of an enterprise's AI and agentic journey. So that's the ecosystem as I see it, Marshall, and obviously Peak is really excited to be playing a part in this.
No, appreciate it, Chris. And maybe segueing a little more on the actual stack that is PKI.
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned Peak optimizes pricing decisions and inventory management decisions. We do this through a number of different agentic applications that are targeted towards specific industries. So quote pricing, which we're going to spend some more time bringing to life today with a transformational story, is heavily used within the manufacturing space, where field sales teams typically need to respond to quotes at a pretty rapid clip and optimize margin, revenue, and conversion rate through their decisions in responding to customers, often with a complex basket of goods required. List pricing optimization we deploy for CPGs, retailers, and manufacturers. And this is ultimately using multi-echelon demand forecasting and then a range of machine learning simulation techniques to optimize the list prices we set to yield the most value. Then we have markdown and promos. This is used heavily in retail environments. Some of our biggest retail customers leverage this application to drive enormous uplifts in net margin within their P&L. And this is all about it within every clearance window that a retailer has or any markdown moment. We ultimately deploy forecasting capabilities, price elasticities, cross elasticities, and then we optimize the decision point for the maximum amount of net margin alongside the sell-through goals that the business is targeting. Then on the inventory side, we have dynamic inventory. This is a multi-echelon forecasting capability that also sets dynamic safety stock levels, so minimum and maximum safety stock levels for every SKU in every single location across an enterprise's distribution network. This is deployed again by some of our most successful customers that have gone on an AI journey with us and typically yields a 10-15% working capital efficiency. We then deploy in tandem with dynamic inventory, typically a make, move, or buy decision making module. So reordering, replenishing, or planning production. And this effectively optimizes the business decision on the back of the dynamic inventory, which is setting the optimal safety stock levels around the network. Around all of this, we then have agents that support with ad hoc analytics, with explainability to illuminate the black box of predictive decision making that is often associated with quite advanced AI solutions. We have agentic scenario planning capabilities, and then we have conversational agents that enable us to interact directly with our customers as well, which we'll bring to life through the quote pricing story in a moment. So that's a whirlwind tour of some of Peak's agentic AI applications.
No, and I know we're going to unpack quite a bit of this, Chris. I think that was kind of the trailer to the movie to come here today. But maybe before we jump forward into the current state and the future, we always find it helpful to look at. You can go next, Brian. To look at where we've been actually from a journey perspective. And I think if I could, Chris, I'm going to tackle phase one and phase two, and would love you to kind of segue to phase three here, kind of the precipice of where we're at right now. Phase one to me was really about the database, the pre-cloud era. So, really kind of think of this as the vertical application phase. So, ERPs, MRPs, mainframes. A lot of times when you're talking oil and gas or manufacturing distribution. These are still all in production, obviously, today, and critical from a system of record perspective. The issue is clearly that as businesses scaled, fragmentation also scaled, required new processes around reporting and master data management, cleansing, and just overall process improvement. Now, fast forward to phase two, and I would argue we're going to be in phase two, toes in phase two plus phase three, depending on the maturity of an enterprise, from an infosec and just an architecture, and then overall change management perspective. This is really where UiPath kicked into high gear. This was the ability with open architecture frameworks to go horizontal. So you went from vertical app, and you really were starting to be able to go horizontal, connecting long-running workflows like you couldn't previously, integration services being available, audible orchestration. So UiPath has provided immense value kind of in this phase two era. And, once again, I think I don't want anybody to think that this is either or. You kind of need all these phases to evolve your business operations. They're building blocks and they create a sound foundation for the next actor in our process, which is agentic. So, think agentic as potentially a new way to do things, but it's also can be the last mile of automation in a lot of scenarios with human in the loop. So maybe taking us into phase three here, Chris, would love for you to kind of give your perspective on that before Brian takes us into the next double click here.
Yeah, of course. I think you framed it nicely at the start, Marshall, when you mentioned there's an incrementality to agentic, and we can see here in phase one, humans plus spreadsheets and business intelligence, more deterministic analytics that have existed over the previous decades, really laid the foundation for us within our enterprises to understand what data do we need to capture throughout our key commercial or supply chain workflows in order to even think about optimizing decision making using machine learning rather than pure human intelligence. And I think that's a lot of how I view phase one is around the understanding of your business processes, the understanding of critical guardrails, of operating procedures, of data flows, of how decisions are actually made in the business. And that's an invaluable phase. It shouldn't be kind of shunned just because it doesn't have any serious advanced technologies deployed in it. And that really lays the foundations to move into phase two. Well, once you understand the business processes, once you understand the data flows, you can start to realistically deploy machine learning in a way and automation and bots in a way that it can drive incremental productivity gains and incremental margin or revenue gains through the deployment of machine learning because we can start to optimize commercial decision making faster and a much greater scale than we could previously in phase one. And you can only do that if you understand your business process and you understand the guardrails. We mentioned right at the start, AI and agentic applications are only as good as the tools that they use and the context in which they're grounded in. And that context, critically, is your operating procedures, your hard and soft guardrails, the things that constrain your ability to make the perfect decision every single time within your business, whether you're moving stock around or whether you're pricing a product. So that's phase two for me. Once you understand all of that, and if you've successfully deployed bots and machine learning to augment a key business process, you're then in a really good position to deploy agents in a controlled fashion with full understanding of the business context and full understanding of how decisions are made within your business to drive further incremental gains. And I think that's really a nice jumping off point actually for the customer story that we'll talk through because we're going to talk about a manufacturer that has been on this exact journey over the last 2 years, and we'll see towards the end of that story how they're now looking at deploying agents to further optimize the business process that they've been working on for the last couple of years.
So building off those phases, just want to double click a little bit from what we're hearing consistently from leadership and across industries. So there are a few different themes that kept coming up, and I think that's going to translate really well into what we're looking at today. So first is scaling smarter, growth without adding headcount, using AI and automation, obviously, to extend that team capacity and not replace it. So the consistent thing that I know that I hear all the time is, if we have to grow in this particular area through M&A or through revenue growth, and we need to support this particular process, I need to hire. That's the decision right now. Second one is on data access and decision making. Probably no surprise if you've been running a program this for more than a week, still struggle around accessing clean data fast enough to make those informed decisions that will help drive demand and intelligently connect systems. What do I hear all the time? We have the data, it's just not easily accessible, and it's kind of everywhere. Third one is talent, whether that's Agentic or any other technology using for the first time. There's a concern around that shift from traditional RPA to Agentic, demanding new skill sets, and honestly, a new way of thinking. I think we'll get into that a little bit more as well. Moving from rigid rule-based orchestration into a UiPath Maestro, which unifies humans, bots, and then provides that agent across end-to-end workflows. And then finally, decisions over dashboarding. Not that dashboards aren't valuable, but that decisioning piece. C-suite often doesn't want to just hear about the dashboarding effect, but wants innovation, looking for that next step, looking for that decision agent to take action. Chris, I'll pass to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Let's jump to the next slide. So with that board level context in mind, we're going to look at the 2-year transformation journey for a global building materials manufacturer called Heidelberg Materials. This is a hugely complex manufacturing business. And like many manufacturing businesses that we've spoken to over the years, when we began our engagement with them, there were feelings that there were data capture challenges. We often talk to manufacturers and the phrase, we have the worst data, that there's no way we'll be ready for AI. And this isn't unusual. So, very complex traditional manufacturing business in a way. Many different manufacturing locations, big revenue targets and aggressive EBIT targets in ultimately what is a commodity materials market, with a need to really optimize margin in every single decision they make. And when Peak began to engage with them, not only with the data challenges, but also a feeling that some processes were potentially suboptimal as well, highly manual, and creating some challenges in their ability to ultimately deliver the EBIT targets that they wanted to into the market. So I think, Brian, you're going to give us a window into the challenges that I imagine many manufacturers face in their quote pricing process, and we can then give an overview of the phase 1 of the manual quote process here as well.
Absolutely. So some themes here from the previous slide as well, but the common challenges that we're hearing often: silo data. So means sales teams, for example, might not have easy accessible context for what they're quoting that day. So material availability, transport costs, real-time market conditions, target margins, plant capacity, that's near and dear to my heart, and that slows everything down. Excessive discounting. So often a knee-jerk response to uncertainty, or frankly, that lack of visibility, might win deals in the short term, but increases a lot of issues in the long term. So risk due to delivery or quality issues, trying to push something out. Forecasting is typically unpredictable, and that affects a lot of those variables in the manufacturing environment: manpower, time, cost, things of that standpoint. And that creates a lot of frustration, both internally and then ultimately to that end user. Lack of consistency, see this all the time as well. Different market or sales reps might be pricing the same product differently in different markets. That certainly erodes customer confidence, customer trust, and muddles that your overall value proposition. And then finally, slow response rate. So we all know quoting, speed wins, the early bird gets the worm, and increasingly that worm is being automated. So to provide a manual step one process, I think we're all familiar with this looks like on a regular basis. There's a request, there's a process for quote creation, there's some type of analysis depending on who that persona looks like, and then obviously approval and submission. Now, certainly this is the happy path. I know that in my experience, it was a very real world daily piece for operations where a customer asks for a quote. If sales doesn't have all the information, it would quite literally come down to the production floor and then ask the operations team, okay, if we get this inventory and supplies at this time, what is the promise date that you can commit to? Can you do that by X date? That's very tribal, very manual, and very much a shot in the dark. So this is where this process takes a very long time, and then this is a snowball effect of inefficiency.
Thanks, Brian. And now we'll take a look at phase two, which is really where that transformation journey starts to come to life. So phase one is where a lot of that business process understanding, data understanding, business guardrail understanding comes to the fore. That is then brought into phase two. So as a quote is received, UiPath bots in the new deployment for this process, UiPath bots rapidly compile all of the data sets that Brian alluded to. So plant capacity, targets, regional market sensitivities, current haulage costs, current material costs, a range of different data sources are captured as each and every quote flows through into the business. And UiPath grabs that structured and unstructured data and passes it to the Peak application in near real time. It's on about a 10 to 15 minute cadence currently. That then invokes the AI pricing engine. So Peak deploys a range of advanced machine learning workflows that simulate the conversion likelihood for that unique customer based on their trading history for thousands of different prices and creates an optimal pricing decision that maximizes revenue or margin dependent on that region specific goal at that moment in time and the conversion rate for that given customer on the overall quote. Once that simulation has run, the recommendation for the price range is then passed back to UiPath, and UiPath automates the execution and distribution of that decision downstream in multiple formats back into SAP. And this is all monitored via a UiPath control tower. One thing I'll call out here, the business results are obviously enormous here. The quote response speed is taken from 8 hours to 30 minutes for a complex basket of goods. And in a commodity market where each and every quote often goes to Heidelberg and then Heidelberg's nearest 5 competitors within the region, quote response speed is absolutely critical to driving an uplift in conversion. But Marshall, I thought I'd hand to you for a broader sense of the type of business value impact that these types of solutions are driving within manufacturing environments, not just at Heidelberg.
Well, Chris, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think speed to value is everything. And I think the beauty of where we're going and what Peak AI, it's really kind of model invoked into the workflow here. You have UiPath at the bookends with a Peak AI model orchestrating kind of some of the decisioning automation, and if you will, and ingesting all this data. But it's speed to value. And whenever we look at creating business cases for automation and agentic AI programs, yes, you have to have a cost savings. You have to have a theory on cost savings, but that's sometimes a necessary evil. Really the focus, what you're highlighting here, which is what we've seen with Peak AI, is that can be short-sighted. And yes, cost is the fuel, but the fire is really the customer experience and the growth profile this can create. So if you can have that turnaround time, you're going to win more times than you lose against your competition, especially in a commoditized space. So it should absolutely be more. I mean, you could have calculated this just pure on cost savings, but I like your conversion metrics. And I think it opens up the aperture for anybody that's been at the intelligent automation and increasingly the agentic orchestration game for a little bit. It opens up the aperture for value levers that maybe traditionally we couldn't invoked because we were only in the back office or we were only relegated to a cost center as opposed to a revenue generating center.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of summarizing it. And I think the um, UiPath is the kind of muscle at the bookends, as you put it, Marshall. I think that the agents think, robots do, and people lead rhetoric is a really nice one. And I think this really brings it to life with this kind of bookending of capability that you just described. If we now move on to phase three, and Brian, if you can hit play on the video, we're going to bring to life the next steps for agentic pricing here. So what you can see on your screens is a typical quote request coming through from a customer via email. We're then going into the back end into a Maestro workflow here in the UiPath platform. And what we can see is we're extracting the customer information and the product information from this email as it's flowed through. So structured and unstructured data that's being passed through to a bot. And we're then going to validate the inquiry details and ensure that we can reconcile the customer and the product information. Once we've done that and validated that the inquiry is with one of our customers and we know which SKU codes, we're going to simulate the price. And you can see now the Peak interface where those products have been passed to Peak. We've run the quote pricing API against those products, and we have simulated the optimal quote price range for those products in the overall basket of goods. The sales manager in this case then approves the prices that we have suggested for that particular customer, factoring for all of the different data points we talked through earlier and factoring for the different guardrails that are critical for this manufacturer. And we pass that information back to a quote response agent, which is a conversational agent that is grounded in the template that we want to respond in and can capture the different quote recommendations we've passed to it. And that is then handed back to the email client that distributes the quote back to the customer in the format that we desire. The thing I really like about this phase three of the story is we've started with an 8 hour on average process to respond to a quote request. We've gone through phase two where we're getting down to about 30 minutes for a quote request. And in this capability that we've just showcased, we're now down to about 1 minute and 30 seconds. The compounding rate of productivity, the compounding rate of margin, and the compounding rate of conversion that is derived from this type of agentic transformation over time is absolutely enormous, to your point earlier, Marshall. And I think this is a really nice, real, pragmatic use case of a manufacturing story in a commercial team that battled with data issues 2 years ago, battled with process issues 2 years ago, to now leveraging the most advanced capabilities available on the market to drive enterprise grade, secure agentic automation, which I think is a really powerful showcase of real agentic in action. So if we jump to the next slide, Brian, we're just going to double click now. This is a busy slide, so you'll bear with me. If we start on the left-hand side, we have the typical data inputs that the quote pricing AI application typically requires in order to operate. And this input data model, it's important to note, is an absolutely critical step in deploying this type of capability. So many of the biggest challenges of getting value out of AI, and Marshall, Brian, we've spoken about this before, is actually in capturing the right data at the right cadence to deploy an enterprise grade productized solution within your business environment. And then the change management often required to get people to embrace and actually use the application. The technology in the center, in many ways, not to trivialize it is the easy bit. We know how to deploy these applications. We know how to architect them and configure them for business environments. But these bookends of data input and then change management around the outputs are critical. So on the left, we have the data inputs, and this is where we need to capture intradaily quote information, sales transaction information, product metadata, customer data, merchant data, project data, and other dynamic data points that may change, within an intradaily basis. So this could be things like market dynamics changing swiftly. It could be overproduction a manufacturing facility where we need to shift to a volume-based optimization rather than a margin-based optimization because we need to clear through some excess product that has been created for whatever reason. So this is all the type of data that we need to capture in secure enterprise-grade data feeds that can pass through to the application in near real time in order for it to make the type of decision recommendations. Once that data is captured, transformed, and passed through, we have a selling price model that predicts the selling price of each quote line within that complex basket of goods based on historical sales. This is a nice way of thinking about this is basically what would the average salesperson quote this as on the most average basis probabilistically. So that's the selling price model. We then have a quote conversion model that looks at the unique customer and predicts the likelihood of each quote line or quote converting at a given price. So not just that the historical selling price, but an array of different potential price points. And along that trade-off curve of conversion rate probability and net margin or revenue, we can ultimately optimize the perfect point where we can maximize the probability of conversion whilst also maximizing the probability of yielding the most margin. Those two models then interact with a quote price optimizer, and this is where we basically push the outputs through an optimizer that constrains the output based on the realities, the real context of the business environment. So there may be specific plant margin targets that need to be hit that constrain the output and ultimately mean that we need to push the price slightly higher up than the decision being recommended. So we constrain the output and we optimize it accordingly to achieve the KPIs and objective in line with the realities of the business and the operating procedures. That is then passed downstream, the output into SAP, Salesforce, a CPQ tool, where a business user can execute the decision in the manner they choose. Wrapped around this capability is then a range of agents, as we saw in the Maestro video. We had a conversational agent in there. There's also agents that the salesperson can interact with directly on the fly as they're reviewing the quote recommendation for explainability of why a particular price has been arrived at. And that explainability is, of course, in natural language. The sales guidance that's provided based on the customer's unique trading history. There's ad hoc analytics that can be run by the end user. And as I mentioned, the customer conversation agents as well, which can be exposed through a back-end email client, as we did there, but can also be exposed through a digital channel like a trade portal, where a customer can interact directly with a conversational agent that is leveraging the quote pricing application to determine the types of prices it is giving back to the customer in real time. Once that output is distributed, as we mentioned on the previous slides, the typical value uplifts we see are really sizable in terms of margin uplifts in every environment this has been deployed. The win rate uplifts equally are sizable, and that 90% improvement in quote response speed is really powerful. Critically here, there's an AI feedback loop. So for every quote that is won or lost, that immediately feeds back into the next optimization for the model. So we're learning in real time, and the model continuously improves based on its performance out in the field, which is obviously very important. Now let's flick through the next few slides, Brian, with one eye on the time, just to look at how do we expose this capability into the business user's world, and how do we get a window into the AI optimization. So here, the first user interface example is really a simple example of viewing the different accounts and quotes associated to those accounts that have flowed through. We've obviously had to anonymize some of this, but you can see the type of information that is captured. And this just gives the salesperson and sales manager a window into the current quotes open within their patch. And we can see the ones that are fully priced, won, lost, and so on. When we click into a quote, next slide, Brian, we can then see the type of data and information that we're capturing. So we're looking at the customer, the closest manufacturing facility to that customer to service the demand. We've also got the plant margin target, the distance that the customer is from the main plant. And then in the bottom part of the interface, we can see each itemized product and the volume or quantity of that product required within the quote. So we're pricing a quote line and then an overall basket for the overall quote. And we're using material costs, haulage costs, unit margin goals, and a range of other data points to ultimately provision this optimal range that you can see in the center of the screen. The final user interface I wanted to share is a really powerful one, in my opinion, which on the previous application architecture slide, you will have noticed that in the center, the component models were almost modular by nature. It wasn't one single monolithic application. We've not just done this on a visual basis, that the way in which these applications are constructed are fully composable. So when I talk about input data models, when I talk about machine learning models, agents, user interfaces, APIs, these are all composable, packaged, containerized bits of code that can interact elegantly with each other, but can also be decomposed and reconstructed for other applications too. So this is a highly modern software principle that guides our application architecture. The reason this is important is it means that when we engage with different manufacturers, Heidelberg have a quote price process that might look on the surface relatively similar to other manufacturers, but each manufacturer will have unique constraints, unique business logic that determines how they want their AI to ultimately operate. The importance of the applications being composable is we can rapidly configure the applications to represent some of that uniqueness very quickly. In the case of this application deployment, a really important feature that wasn't available out of the box at the time, but is on our product roadmap over the next quarter, was to factor for competitor proximity and density. So because this is cement and aggregates products, very, very heavy goods to transport, haulage costs are a critical feature of the AI pricing recommendation. So by knowing that you have competitors that are potentially closer to the end customer destination for the product compared to your plant, means that the AI can dynamically factor for each competitor's distance to the customer, and then factor that into the AI decisioning process, so that we can ultimately recognize that if there's several competitors closer to the end customer, we're going to have to potentially drop prices slightly and eat into some marginal gains in terms of net margin in order to raise the conversion rate probability, because it's highly likely that those competitors will be offering a slightly cheaper cost because they're not going to incur as much haulage costs. So this type of dynamic feature engineering into the application is really important. There's dozens of examples of this type of sophistication in all of our applications, but I wanted to bring this one to life as I think it's a really important demonstration for this particular use case. So I'm going to hand back to Brian now. I think just to summarize, if phase one was all about creating the intimate human level understanding of the right data, the right guardrails, phase two was all about leveraging automation for data capture, leveraging machine learning for harnessing all of that data in order to operate and price up every deal like the best salesperson every single time. Then phase three was all about taking agents and all of the incremental gains that we've made in phase one and phase two and add even faster quote response speed to that end-to-end process, and ultimately incremental conversion rate uplifts and margin uplifts as well. So that's the 3-year transformation story, and I'll now pass to Brian to wrap us up with some key insights on that broader transformation.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And just a good segue and just a broader, what does that look like for these transformations at a broader perspective? So you've got data capture with agentic applications. Every interaction becomes fuel for that smarter automation. So Chris, you talked about that, how it's a continuous loop of educating itself. Second, end user adoption. Obviously, whether that's an agentic application or anything, automation solutions are only as good as how they are used. So that adoption really needs to be part of that transformation, so you can accelerate the systems and the response and get real business results, because ultimately that's the goal. Third, process change management. Change management, definitely an overused term, but it's also an overlooked variable very often. So we're not simply automating steps, we're talking about the evolution of how decisions are made. So people need to be a big part of that as well. And then finally, AI literacy. So oftentimes when I know Chris is doing this, Marshall's doing this, myself, when we're doing these discovery diagnostics and things of that standpoint, the education is important so that the end user understands the capacity and the capability. So that AI literacy is important. Enable your teams to be empowered to help understand and target those opportunities for agentic automation. So as a next step, it's a good idea to look back at your production automations. Where have you already built solid value, especially in pricing and inventory, and then where are those gaps? Are they prime candidates for a new layer of intelligence? Agentic applications like Peak don't just require starting from scratch, which is a big value prop to these organizations. So let's transition to a little bit of Q&A because I know we have some in the hopper here.
We have a lot of Q&A, and I am happy to moderate it here. And maybe one last kind of reinforcement of what you just said, Brian. I think agentic AI is going to be transformational. I think we are all embracing that, folks that have been in this space for a while. But I do think we don't have to start from scratch. I think that's a very important point. There is intentional AI, there's purpose-built AI that you can invoke today from a model perspective, from a data quality and integrity perspective, into your workflows that you've already, semi-automated, if you will. So, I think that's a great call out is, look for opportunities to invoke another layer of intelligence on top of some of the decision making that, was more human in the loop, which is one of the questions we have in Q&A. So I'm going to start there. Chris, I think you're going to be on point for some of these. So one of the questions we've got in the Q&A queue is there any human in the loop element to this process? How do you know the pricing is correct? And I think that question came in before you went through some of the user interfaces on the quotes, but would love for you to address that question.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the question, John. I think yes, there is human in the loop. It's critical. I think salespeople are very talented engaging in relationships with key customers and key customer accounts, and it's critical that in many ways these types of solutions are liberating them to get their heads out of spreadsheets and BI dashboards and into engaging direct with customers and growing market share and more relationships accordingly and proactively. So the human in the loop element is critical in the phase 2 that I described. The sales individual ultimately analyzes the recommended quote price range and can often overwrite it if they don't feel, for whatever reason, that some kind of dimension or something they're aware of in the local market hasn't been factored in for whatever reason. They can overrate it. That is obviously captured by ourselves within the system, and we can then review why and the frequency of overwrites, and that forms the basis for improving the application over time. But yeah, that's critical. And really, I mentioned the change management element earlier. I think the incremental phasing for these types of deployments is really important to build trust, build adoption, and build that accepted rate of recommendation, which is a key metric that we track over time. Then in the Maestro workflow I showed, again, you can see the sales manager and salesperson in the loop there. Ultimately interacting with the recommended quote price range. We obviously showed very, very quickly the acceptance of that approval there, but yeah, equally important in that end-to-end process.
No, that's great. Appreciate that explanation there, Chris. The next one is a little more industry specific, and I'm going to ask it, and then I'll give you initial thoughts, and then Chris, Brian, feel free to chime in because I certainly this one's near and dear to my heart. So the question from Nora: where have you seen big wins with inventory and supply chain management in the healthcare industry? And so, maybe to start with some thoughts on this one from kind of invoking a peak AI into current system landscape perspective, Laura. I think demand forecasting inventory replenishment is critical. So obviously being able to forecast supplies if you're a healthcare provider, any type of pharma orders that are required, depending on the specialization of any health system. I mean, there's a lot of volatility in supply chains, especially nowadays. I think being able to do some demand forecasting is something very possible, so you don't have stockouts or overstock situations. I've also seen across multi-site provider systems the ability to optimize inventory across sites in more real time. So if it's critical safety stock, or you're just looking to balance inventories and improve kind of that just-in-time turn. The prescriptive analytics you can provide via PKI's model is as long as you have the data ingestion that Chris went through, it's right there. And then, we have seen folks actually go into auto replenishment mode based on certain thresholds, usually always with the human in the loop to validate until we can feel stronger and stronger about the confidence ratings. But that would be just a couple areas kind of in that healthcare space that I would recommend to look at. So, Chris, Brian, anything to add to that one?
The only thing
Good.
to piggyback on there would just be in the respect to demand forecasting, is then and then taking that to the next level. So what's in front of that process? How does that connect to your manpower? How does that connect to your overall P&L costs? What does that do for your distribution centers and manpower associated with it? So I think once you have that figured out, which is honestly a common pain point that we hear all the time, how do you make that even a bigger value statement?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good addition, Brian. All right, we're going to do two more here. So the next one is around intra-daily data digestion. How do agents handle such sudden data shifts or noise without overreacting or making erratic decisions? So, Chris?
Yeah, great question,
Yeah.
Ian. Thanks for the question. I think we can showcase this to you in a deeper dive demo at some point. We obviously showed some UIs today, but there's a guardrail interface that shows some of the weights and biases and key guardrails that are constraining and informing the model output. One of those weightings and biases is towards market sensitivity and the recency of quote information that is being received by the model. And there's different weightings applied based on the recency to try and avoid exactly what you're describing, which is an anomaly quote that is processed at a certain price or overwritten for whatever reason, then massively over biasing the model's output for future quotes within a short time horizon. So yeah, it's all done in the weightings in the back end, which we'll share some information actually following this on some of those key guardrails and how that can be achieved.
No, that's great, Chris. And I do recommend for folks to look at those guardrails. Obviously, that's critical to take anything into production and at enterprise scale, but it's very much been thought out in the PKI solution. I think to do enterprise technology, you kind of need to lead with governance and guardrails, especially when we're talking about probabilistic technologies like PKI. Okay, I fabricated a little bit. We're going to take two more because they're continuing to come in. So the next one is around other considerations on the product master side. So how would this tool work in consideration of non-managed products, often known as generics, where there isn't a SKU setup, but a one-time special quote sale opportunity? May even be an engineered product that would need to have many components taken into consideration for the finished good. So basically one-offs that are not in your managed product data tables, if you will, is kind of how I read that one, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, candidly, these types of agentic solutions are really good when there are known SKUs because there is then a profile of historical transactions that can be used for that selling price model that I referenced earlier. That being said, the Heidelberg use case, there's 30,000 different material combinations that roll up into different SKUs. So there is an element of what's being described in this question. I think if the data existed where you could somehow create a shadow SKU in a way that could look at some of the data points that inform the quote and the way in which the salesperson would typically respond. So, material information, product family, dimensions, weight, all the typical factors that would typically go into like an engineer to order product. If there was a way of capturing that consistently and then drawing parallels historically to other things that have been sold, you may then be able to train a machine learning model to capture some of that. It's a really good question. I'll take that one away to speak to our data science team as well, as I'm sure they've mulled it over and thought about that specifically. But yeah, thanks for the question, and hopefully that answers it partially. But we'll come back on that one.
Yeah, that wasn't a softball. That was a more of a hard ball, but a real world scenario, of course. So,
Yeah.
uh, okay, last question. How does the quoting AI adjust in freight rates and other changes with suppliers?
Yeah, it's another really good question. So again, as long as you have the data, if you're capturing freight rate cards, if you've got something like Cargo Sphere or APIs into some of the big carriers that can capture that data systematically or even batched daily, whatever cadence you're trying to capture it via, then you could factor that in as a key feature into the model, and it would form part of the basis of the cost model within the input data model that the AI takes into account. Um, so yeah, if you've got the data or you've got access to the APIs, then it can factor that freight information in.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think that exhausts the Q&A queue. So really appreciate everybody's time. If there are any follow-up questions, the Ashling and UiPath respective teams will be aggregating and sending this communication and the recording out. Certainly appreciate your time, Brian and Chris. Very excited about kind of how this is all evolving together. And we're breaking down silos and taking on a broader end-to-end automation opportunity here. So really appreciate the efforts here and look forward to hearing so much more on the success stories.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks, Marshall. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Marshall.